O-Level Pack Studies 2059 P1, Question 4, May-June 2024. Question A. Describe the non-cooperation movement of the 1920s. For marks? Answer. The non-cooperation movement, launched in 1920 by Mahatma Gandhi in alliance with the Khilafat movement, was a nationwide campaign of non-violent civil disobedience against British rule. Its goal was to pressure Britain into granting self-rule, Swaraj, by making the administration of India impossible. Methods included boycotting British goods, courts, schools, and elections, surrendering titles and honours, and resigning from government service. This campaign marked a new phase of mass public participation in the freedom struggle. However, Gandhi abruptly ended the movement in 1922 following the Chauri Chaura incident, where protesters turned violent, violating its core principle of non-violence. Question B. Explain why Britain would not grant self-rule to the subcontinent in 1919. 7 marks. Answer. Britain was unwilling to grant self-rule in 1919 primarily due to the subcontinent's immense economic and strategic value. Known as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, India was a vital source of raw materials, a captive market for British manufactured goods, and a significant contributor of manpower for the army. After the huge financial cost of World War I, Britain needed to exploit its colonial resources, especially India's, to rebuild its own economy. Relinquishing control would have crippled Britain financially and severely diminished its status as a global superpower. Furthermore, the British held a paternalistic view, arguing that Indians were not yet ready for self-governance. They pointed to deep-seated religious divisions between Hindus and Muslims and the complex system of princely states as evidence that their withdrawal would lead to chaos and civil war. The Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919 were therefore designed as a limited concession, introducing a system of diarchy to give Indians some experience in government while keeping key areas like finance and defence firmly in British hands. This was a strategy to placate Indian demands, not to grant independence. Question C. To what extent were Muhammad Ali Jinnah's 14 points the most important attempt at achieving constitutional reform in the subcontinent between 1928 and 1935? Explain your answer. 14 marks. Answer. Muhammad Ali Jinnah's 14 points were a profoundly important attempt at achieving constitutional reform, but their significance lies more in defining Muslim political identity than in being the single most important reform attempt overall. They were a crucial response to other constitutional efforts and shaped all subsequent negotiations, but events like the Round Table Conferences and the Government of India Act 1935 represented more comprehensive attempts at reform. The importance of the 14 points cannot be overstated from the Muslim perspective. They were formulated in 1929 as a direct rejection of the Nehru Report, 1928, which had recommended a unitary government and denied the principle of separate electorates for Muslims. Jinnah's points masterfully articulated the non-negotiable demands for the protection of Muslim political, religious, and cultural rights. They called for a federal system with provincial autonomy, one-third Muslim representation in the central legislature, and the continuation of separate electorates, effectively becoming the bedrock of Muslim political demands for the next decade. However, other attempts during this period were also highly significant. The Nehru Report, despite its flaws, was a landmark moment as the first major attempt by Indians themselves to draft a constitution for the subcontinent. Furthermore, the British-led Simon Commission, though widely boycotted, produced a report that formed the basis of discussions at the Round Table Conferences. These initiatives were essential parts of the constitutional dialogue that the 14 points were responding to. The Round Table Conferences, 1930–32, arguably represent a more direct and inclusive attempt at reform. These conferences brought all major stakeholders, the British government, Indian political parties, and representatives of the princely states, to the negotiating table. While Jinnah used his 14 points as his primary negotiating tool during these talks, the conferences themselves were the main arena for attempting to hammer out a constitutional settlement for all of India. In conclusion, while the 14 points were the most important document in articulating and unifying the Muslim position, they were a set of demands rather than a comprehensive reform in themselves. The most significant attempt at achieving reform was the process of the Round Table Conferences, which culminated in the most substantial constitutional outcome of the period, the Government of India Act of 1935. Therefore, the 14 points were a vital catalyst and a critical component of the reform process, but not singularly the most important attempt.